Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On June 14th, I asked the Prime Minister a very specific question. I asked how much the Liberals' new carbon tax was going to cost Canadians. While Canadians listening to the official reply from the government would have been baffled by the response, which was an attack on small business and their next payroll tax increase, it's evident from that non-response the last thing this government wants people to know is how much the Liberals' carbon tax is going to make all Canadians poorer. When it comes to the Canadian government, talking points on the cost of the new Liberal carbon tax, Canadians know they're hearing government spin. Carbon taxes will become a tax and spend grab that lets this government spend ever greater amounts on wacky left-wing experiments in social engineering as it tries to move Canadians ever closer to the dystopian world described by George Orwell in his novel 1984. And I quote from the member from Ottawa Centre from the same question period, as her comments apply to her own non-answers to legitimate carbon tax cost concerns of Canadians. Quote, "It is really sad that we have fake news, misinformation and fake news." End of quote. This comment comes from a government and a Prime Minister who thinks the novel 1984 is prophecy. The author of that fiction novel, George Orwell, is quoted as saying, quote, "In a time of universal deceit, truth-telling is a revolutionary act," end of quote. For the benefit of Canadians who want to know how much the new Liberal carbon tax is going to cost them, here is the revolutionary act of providing some cold, hard facts. Using energy consumption data from Statistics Canada and imputing prices from average household expenditure on transportation fuels and provincial gasoline prices, we can calculate the impact of the carbon tax on a typical Canadian household. The costs to households will be significant. 3 provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia, will be hit with more than $1,000 of carbon tax per year to comply with the $50 per ton carbon tax Ottawa has mandated for 2022. Nova Scotia, $1,120, and Alberta, $1,111 will have the highest bills, followed by Saskatchewan at $1,032, New Brunswick at $963, Newfoundland at $859, and Prince Edward Island at $788. The average household in Ontario will pay $707 a year to comply with the carbon tax once it's fully implemented. But wait. Federal, provincial, and municipal taxes already make up 44 cents of the average fuel pump price of $1.34 per litre. The reality is the typical Canadian driver already pays the equivalent of a carbon tax of $200 per tonne, costing more than $28 for a 64-litre fill-up and generating government revenues of $24 billion in 2018. Now, Ontario ratepayers, they've been paying a huge carbon tax for years. Itemized as a global adjustment on Ontario Hydro 1 electricity bills, the price paid is at least $8 billion or $655 per tonne of emissions per household. But it gets worse. Carbon prices must continue to increase sharply to effectively lower emissions. At $100 a tonne, for example, households in Alberta will pay $2,223. In Saskatchewan, they'll pay $2,065, and in Nova Scotia, $2,240. In fact, at $100 a tonne, the average price for households in all provinces is well in excess of $1,000 a year. In Ontario, a significant number of households fit the definition of energy poverty. That is, 10% or more of household expenditures are spent simply procuring the energy needed to live, to power the home, and for transportation. When you add up the costs of power to power the home and the cars, 19.4% of Canadian households devote at least 10% or more of their expenditures to energy. Energy poverty is unconscionable in a country with the world's 3rd largest proven oil reserves and is the 4th largest generator of hydropower. In Ontario, taxpayers have been paying the carbon tax on power since 2009. That year, the Ontario Liberal Party brought in a huge carbon tax on electricity. It was brought in under legislation properly referred to as the Green Energy Act. The Green Energy Act was conceived by Gerald Butts, and as Principal Secretary today to the Prime Minister, Butts played the same role to the disgrace